bad.
What is up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo Renz. It's also known as Ricky Varandas, and I'm laughing because I almost messed it up again. I don't know how I can continuously mess up rolling my R's and saying my name that way when I've been doing it for so many episodes. But anyways, today we have another great doctor, returning guest, Dr. Scott Jensen. He's been on the show before. Actually, I just looked it up, and it was stunning that I didn't realize this before. It was almost exactly a year ago he was on. He was on August 26th, I believe, or sometime at the end of August of 2020, and that was episode 260. So if you go back in the archives, Dr. Scott Jensen, episode 260 of the Ripple Effect Podcast, I believe that podcast was roughly an hour. This podcast is shorter because he's been super busy. He's running for governor of Minnesota. I'm really hoping he wins, and I'm hoping a lot of other people like him get involved locally and really tries to create the change that we need right now. People like myself and other towns and cities all over the U.S. are fighting with their local school committees in regards to enforcing mask mandates for the upcoming school year. If you guys have been listening to my show, you know I've been fighting locally with the town of Ludlow, the school committee here, and they want to mandate masks for the beginning of the school season. If you go back in the archives of my show, you'll see episode 345. We go into the specifics on what's going on locally. If anybody wants to watch that episode and also sign the petition, I put together a petition in regards to making masks optional because it doesn't make any sense to mask healthy children. So please sign the petition if you can. I'm trying to get as many signatures as possible before the 24th Tuesday. We have another committee meeting, and we're hoping that we can kind of put some pressure on them. Also, write the committee. And if you guys aren't from Ludlow, don't worry about it. Just sign the petition to show your support for making masks optional. If you want to wear a mask, great. I don't mind. But making every kid, if they're healthy or not, wear a mask is absolutely insanity. Hopefully I can get this podcast out where some of you guys listening to this can still sign a petition and can contribute, and also contribute by writing school committee, annoy them, let them know, let your voice be heard. It doesn't take a whole lot of time, and it might help make a difference. So you're not just helping my kids, you're helping all the kids in Ludlow. Lastly, this is a Valley for Valley show. If you can't support the show financially, please do. There's plenty of ways of doing it. You can go to my website, rickyvarandas.com, or therippleeffectpodcast.com. Both URLs will take you to the same website, and then you can hit support and see all the ways you can support the show. You can get some merch. You can get signed up on Patreon. We have a PayPal account if you want to donate or tip. We also have a Rockfin channel. We have, I feel like I'm forgetting something. Oh, and you can donate crypto now if you would like. So tons of different ways to support in the show. And of course, like I always tell you guys, if you can't support the show financially, just share the show, review the show, tell people about the show. In this case now, there's another way of supporting me, and that's take a little bit of time to sign the petition and share the petition and email the school committee. That's it, guys. Also, of course, the UNWANTED, available everywhere and anywhere. That's a huge Zoom conference call of researchers and doctors and thinkers and people in the alternative media community. I host it with Sam Tripoli, Midnight Mike, Charlie Robinson, and Dr. Scott Jensen has been on one of those before. It was episode 15, so go back in the archives of the Union of the Unwanted, check out episode 15 with Dr. Scott Jensen, and a bunch of other great podcasters and doctors and people were on that show, so I highly recommend you checking it out. That's it, guys. Enjoy this podcast. Thank you, everybody, for the support, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace. Scott Jensen. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Awesome. Thanks for being with me. I really appreciate it. This world needs people like you more than ever right now.
Unbelievable.
It's blowing my mind. I mean, we'll get right into it because I know you're limited on time. One, it's awesome to see that since last we spoke, you decided to run for governor. I actually had a past Minnesota governor on before some years ago. Jesse Ventura has been on before, and so I love the fact that you're probably much like me, where it's like you hate politics, but the only way of changing things sometimes is actually getting involved. So last we spoke, I think a lot of your focus has been basically exposing how the numbers were being inflated and some of the sketchiness with that. Now with all this talk about, like in local places like where I live in Ludlow, Massachusetts, I'm fighting with the school committee in regards to mandating masks in schools. I'm pushing back as much as I can. I got petitions, and these battles are happening all over the country. Is this a hot topic for you too? Just going back to school, what's the topics and the focus in regards to what you want to change in your state and really hopefully start a trend everywhere?
Well, thanks, Ricky, and it's great to be on with you again. I always appreciate the crisp questions you ask. And I would also remind the viewers and the listeners that you don't prep me with the questions. These are always pretty spontaneous conversations. So I never know if you're going to ask me if I'm going to be rooting for the Red Sox or if I'm going to be pulling for the San Diego Chargers. But a couple things. One is I do suspect that I'm quite a bit like you, Ricky. I'm not crazy about politics. I'm not crazy about politicians. I think they rub elbows with each other and sort of, if you will, do this relatively shameless self-absorption about look at me. And I don't see this governor's race in Minnesota as an opportunity for Scott Jensen. I'd be perfectly content never touching the world of politics again in my life. I see this as an obligation. I see myself being in a position that I could never imagine myself in 18 months ago, but here I am. And I'm a person with a national profile that almost feels like he's having an out-of-body experience. And so here we are, and we're going to do this. So then to your specific question about what are the issues, Ricky, I just got done putting a video up this morning, just absolutely sharing my gut feelings about the number of nurses and physicians and healthcare workers that are now facing a career crisis, where if they do not willingly violate their own core convictions and receive a vaccine, that they will be fired. These same people that a year and a half ago were being celebrated as heroes for being in the trenches are now being told, that was last year, this year, you're dispensable. Well, they're not dispensable. And it's despicable that the big hospital systems are colluding with one another and trying to make sure that everybody gets in line so that their employees will have no choices. So if their employees think that they can quit and go somewhere else and get employed, no such luck. They are putting the hammer to you. This is not right. And then you get into the issue of masks and children and school starting in a brief week or two. And literally, Ricky, I have been traveling all over Minnesota, talking to parent groups, talking to a variety of leaders in communities saying, there is no reason for one single person in Minnesota to operate as some sort of an emperor and say, I will make the decision for everyone. I will make the decree. We can let local control take care of this. We can have teachers and parents and administrators and students work through this process. But the data is very, very evident that the number of teachers that have gotten COVID-19 from children is minuscule at most. And I think even more importantly, I think we're starting to see the collateral damage that does come in regards to the anxiety, the delayed learning, the challenges with different kinds of kids having different kinds of preferences. We are inflicting a harm on our children that is not going to be measurable for years and years, if ever.
Yeah, that's kind of the issue with the mask thing, is that people from the other side of the argument keep just, they keep referring to masks like there's no, just do it. Like there's no risks, there's no harm in it. And it's just something like, hey, even if the masks aren't very effective in spreading the virus, just wear the mask. It helps a little bit. and they keep referring to it like there's zero negative effects in wearing them. And that's the part that's frustrating, because I mean, masking healthy kids makes zero sense to me. And again, you're a doctor and you're much more intelligent than me. So maybe you can expand on this if I'm correct or not. But I mean, masking kids and from spreading a virus that they don't have, it, and yet, so you're getting, if you're looking at the risk reward, you're getting all the risks of wearing a mask, and that's mold, bacteria, CO2, all the things that you're breathing in. The fact that the majority of people, they don't clean their masks, they reuse them because they're always afraid of being stuck somewhere without one, so they'll have one in the car, in the purse, in your pocket, and it's picking up germs. Then you put it on your face, so you're getting all those issues. Then all the long-term trauma, it's the psychological effects. I mean, kids not being able to pick up on social cues, smiles. I mean, smiles are so important for children to just feel, just like they're in a safe place, and people are friendly and approachable. And you're taking that all away to mask kids, and they have very little to no effect. And the thing is, it seems like 2021 is the same script from 2020, just a different year, because they're doing the same thing of in regards to referring to the new variant, like it's super scary. We don't know, and it's the same thing they said in 2020. We don't know. So just play it safe. I mean, is it the same script just playing out again?
I think it is. And I think it's born of a system of unelected bureaucrats, some people who seem to believe that government is the holy grail and seem to forget that government is actually supposed to work for the people, not the other way around. You mentioned a few moments ago, you said that many people are sort of saying regarding the masks or the vaccines or whatever, just do it. Another set of words instead of just do it that we could say is just go along. Just go along. And that always brings to my mind Martin.
Lost you for a second.
So he said first they came for the communists, but I wasn't a communist, so I didn't worry about it. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I wasn't a trade union, so I wasn't worried. Then they came for the Jews, and I wasn't a Jew, so I didn't worry about it. But then they came for me, and there was nobody left to speak for me. This is what's so terribly short-sighted. I understand that there's a division between masks and not masks, vaccines and not vaccines, but I would submit this to you. Virtually no article that I have read, and I read thousands of articles, as many people do, I get that, but virtually no article that I've read has said that if you wear a mask, you will have prevented yourself from getting COVID-19. Virtually every article acknowledges there may be a diminution of your risk, but the fact of the matter is nobody should consider a mask, even an N95 mask, as absolute prevention. The best way to do it is focused protection for the people that are at risk. So I don't see why we'd want to do this to our children. And if you look at the physics, and I've done that before, but the pore size in a cotton mask is basically 5 microns, and a COVID-19 particle is 0.1. It's a difference of 50 times. So, whatever you want to calculate that's relative to a difference in size of 50 times. I've always talked about the 2-inch chain link fence and a gnat. You wouldn't put up a chain link fence to keep the gnats out of your yard. But nevertheless, I think the more important thing is that we need America to wake up. And that means we've got to bridge the chasm between these fighting, quarreling sides. And that's the heartbreaking part for me, Ricky, is it seems to me like last year, we knew there was trouble. We were seeing families and communities and churches broken apart. It's almost this year, the same process on steroids. I mean, we're seeing hate-filled messages. I worry that, are we going to come to bloodshed? I don't know where this ends. And I don't understand how, if you will, a mass media kind of effort, along with bureaucrats, can take an emergency use authorization and move it to full approval. in a very short period of time. I have yet to see what compelling science reversed everyone's concerns, because these are the same vaccines that we pressed pause on, and the VAERS data is quite incriminating. I just shake my head.
Yeah, because Pfizer just got full approval today, right?
Yes.
Jesus.
I just heard that.
I mean, they're literally putting warnings on. Didn't they add warnings to the Pfizer? They've obviously some concerns with the blood clots with the J&J. I mean, there are concerns about this. My argument is always let people get all the information, have the freedom to have the information, and then decide for themselves. The problem is people are being force-fed one side of the argument, and then when you bring something up like a concern to them, they look at you like you're crazy because they haven't even run into any information that even defends your side. So if I have a conversation with somebody and say, hey, you know, there's some evidence that this is harmful, there's healthy young children being harmed by the vaccine, they'll be like, you know, that seems like it makes sense. So let me go look into it. Then they go look into it, and what's Google and YouTube doing? Giving them only one side of the argument. I look like a Alex Jones conspiracy theorist because all the things I referenced, they can't find, doesn't exist, you know? And that's the part that's so frustrating, is that it's not just bad enough that you can potentially get, you know, people can get harmed, which it makes scientifically logical sense. Like I always tell people, I'm like, if I say that if you give everybody peanut butter in the world, and there's going to be some deaths, does that make me anti-peanut butter? Like if I say that some people are going to have allergic reaction to peanut butter, and and not everybody reacts the same way to the same thing, so if you force it upon everybody everywhere, there's going to lead to some adverse reactions. Nobody calls me anti-peanut butter. But if you say anything against the vaccine, even spark the idea that, you know, giving young children it is I mean, my personal believe it's child abuse. I mean, the kids have a better chance of getting struck by lightning on the way to get the vaccine, you know, than actually dying of COVID. It makes so little sense, but yet people have been so brainwashed because they've been force-fed one narrative.
You make a compelling argument, and I had not heard the metaphor of peanut butter, but I understand where you're coming from. If you force everybody to consume some peanut butter, you will have a certain number of peanut allergy deaths. I just, I don't know what to say, Ricky. I have so many patients that are just heartbroken, and literally my day starts at 6 in the morning with text messages and emails asking me to help people keep their job, get a mask exemption, get a vaccine exemption. And those requests, they keep coming through until midnight. And then I start the next day again.
Is this, I know it feels like what do we do, you know? Because I'm kind of in the same boat where, like, I've been fighting the school committee. We forced them into a motion, but literally only one person on the school committee is even open or entertaining the idea of optional masks in the beginning of the school season. So, and it's like, well, if I lose, what do we do? Like, it does feel hopeless. Then there's conversations about that guy in I don't know what his exact title is, Jeffrey Riley. He's like a school education commissioner or something of Massachusetts, that he's suggesting to Charlie Baker that masks should be mandated. I mean, I just had Dr. Peter McCullough on episode or two ago, and like he says, like, nobody's having a public debate about this because all the evidence and information is actually on our side. And if people actually had a open discussion, I emailed all the committee members and I said, you guys are more than welcome to come on the podcast. Let's talk about these topics the way they should be discussed. And that's long form conversation, really pan these things out and really spend time dissecting them, because you can make anybody look like a lunatic or wrong on Facebook or Twitter or whatever with one little, oh, look at what this article says, look what that article says, you know. And so there's so many conflicting opinions and perspectives. But it sounds like, and I don't want to go in your head, it sounds like you sound a little defeated. I mean, do you feel like we have a chance to fight back? People are upset. I mean, that's a good thing, right? That people are actually upset. And just on the last High Wire episode, there was a bunch of school videos of school committees all over the US with parents angry, getting upset, saying, I will never mask my children. So there are, we do exist. We're not a minority. And I think that the media likes to pretend we are, that we're a small minority, but people like you and I who get contacted from people all over the world in regards to their anger and frustration. I mean, we're not a minority. But I do feel at times like, okay, what do we do? Do we just keep on fighting? I mean, I kind of feel like that's our only option.
Let me be clear, Ricky, I am not feeling defeated.
Good.
I am feeling frustrated. And in my worst moments, I feel impotent. And that ticks me off in a big way, because you're absolutely right. This is not some scant small minority that we're talking about against 90% of the population. We're talking about approximately some sort of a 50-50 split. I mean, we've heard people like Tony Fauci talk about he couldn't even get his own department to get vaccinated, if you want to talk about vaccines. And we've got an awful lot of people who realize that when you talk about the data on masks, all you really need to do is ask one question. Where's the data from May 2020, 15 months ago, that was so good that it should obliterate all the data from the 20 years prior? Because when we had SARS Corona 1 in 2002, and we've had multiple respiratory viral infections for centuries, the data from 2000 to 2019 was clear. Masks do not prevent respiratory viral diseases. But something happened in May when guys like Tony Fauci and Mike Osterholm went from no masks to, for heaven's sakes, wear masks. They're life-saving. We've had some people go so far as to say wearing a mask is more important than the vaccine. And then they start infighting themselves, because a lot of the people that are pro-mask and pro-vaccine don't want to have any schisms within their narrative.
Well, you know who also agrees with us in regards to masks? Dr. Fauci's emails, because he was telling his friends that he was telling people that they don't really do much. And then publicly he was telling everybody to wear one. And it's like, this is the same person that people still want to believe over and over again. And now they're talking about the variant. Has that been also a focus of yours? Just kind of observing what's going on with the variant? In my personal opinion, it seems like they're just using it to scare people again. Just the great unknown. We have to do all these things because we don't know. What have you observed about it, and what type of information have you gone into in regards to the variant?
Thank you for that question, Ricky. I would say, first off, I am no virologist, so there's going to be lots of people out there a lot smarter than me on this specific issue. But what I am is I'm a guy in the trenches. I see patients every day. And what I would say is we're seeing several things occur regarding the variant. One is, it would be hard to dispute the fact that the variant, the Delta variant, which is just one of numerous variants, the Delta variant certainly seems to be more readily transmitted. I think 95% of people would probably say, yep, that's true. Perhaps that same 95% or close to would also say that it seems like the lethality is not increasing at the rate the cases are. I saw a graph 3 days ago where you can see the cases and it's just going up, and you see the deaths and it's just flat. So this delta between the cases and the deaths is dramatic. I think we're seeing that from the United Kingdom, from Israel, from Iceland, and a lot of places. So that's sort of the backdrop. Then we look at a place like Sweden, and we see that they've really sort of lived life normally, and they're doing just fine. Then we see a place like Australia and New Zealand, where it seems like people have truly become nothing other than wards of the state. And then amidst all that, we're told that the Delta variant appears to be somewhat refractory to the vaccine. On the same day last week, we had the Mayo Clinic come out and say that the Delta variant, the vaccine is only 42% effective against it. We had the United Kingdom come out and say something similar. We had Israel come out and say something, and we had Moderna and Pfizer both acknowledge that their vaccines were not as effective against the Delta variant as they thought it would be. And so what did they tell us to do? Get vaccinated and think about a booster. You look at this, and it's really becoming apparent to millions and millions of people that there is this narrative. And if you violate the narrative, you're going to be at risk. But I can't help but think that we're seeing this Delta variant just rip through many places, Minnesota, America, other countries. It's moving fast. And in many situations, it's creating a natural immunity. And so I still have a fair amount of hope that as a nation, as a planet, we're doing what has to be done. And the idea that we're going to beat down this COVID virus with these tactics of ours is going to ultimately fail. We're going to find that. And we're going to find that the best laid plans of mice and men didn't quite pull it off. But literally the intrinsic abilities of our own immune systems will be what wins the day.
Yeah, that's how we fought chickenpox growing up, right? You got it, and then you're immune to it. I mean, that's the thing about the Delta variant is one, I'd like to know your opinion also, because some people have been asking me, how are they testing for it? And how many people are actually, because they're seeing cases go up. A lot of people are assuming they're Delta variant, but I mean, how many of those cases are actually being sent out to a lab and checked to see which variant it is?
A very small amount. So what you do, generally, when you're doing a test, like a PCR test, you're looking for a fragment of a sequence of RNA bases. But and those kits don't test for Delta versus Lambda or Alpha. But what you have to do is you have to get the swab and draw out the virus, and then you have to have it sequenced. And that's a much more involved process. And so typically what you'll do is you'll sequence a certain number and you'll extrapolate that data. So say you have 10,000 people with positive COVID tests. Perhaps you take 100 of those and try to grow viral culture. And if you get it, then maybe of those 100 viral culture growths, maybe you would sequence 10 or 20 and then extrapolate to the 10,000. But that's how it's done. So it's not, that part of it really isn't science as much as statistical extrapolation. Some people might call it statistical manipulation. But no, we're not seeing hospitals and clinics like the ones I interface with on a daily basis. We're not seeing those kinds of facilities sequencing and making definitive determinations about whether or not this is a Lambda or a Delta variant.
And I know, didn't you you were part of auditing some COVID deaths, and weren't you, right? Did I read that correctly, right? Is that also is that concern kind of behind us, or do you think that there could still be a concern about inflation of numbers for these other purposes?
Gross inflation of numbers for a variety of purposes. Here's a for instance. A lot of legacy media sources will report 9 out of 10 hospitals have their ICUs 95% full. Like we're supposed to go Chicken Little and say, oh, the sky is falling. If you run a hospital, and I talk to hospital administrators a lot. If you run a hospital, you know that typically you need to run somewhere between 70 and 80% full in order to stay in the black and to meet the obligations of your mission to both your organization as well as the community in which you serve. ICUs oftentimes will be downsized if they're not running at a certain capacity. You'll basically put them in mothballs because you don't need them. I've been in hospitals where they maybe have 6 ICU beds, but when 3 months pass and they never use more than 4 of them, they'll say, well, let's not staff 6 ICU beds. these kinds of tools are used all the time. So what we should be looking at, and I can speak more to Minnesota than I can to any other state, but what we should be looking at, what is the capacity of ICU beds we have in the state? Because we transfer patients around. And then what is the occupancy of the ICU beds? And then of that occupancy, how many of those are COVID-19 patients? Because we had put a hold on a lot of medical procedures that had stopped for a long time. So right now, most of the hospitals that I'm engaging with, the bulk of their ICU patients are not COVID-19 patients. Fact of the matter is, on a statewide basis, I don't know that we've gotten to that 15%, 15% metric yet. So if someone says to me, well, my ICU beds are 95% full, it might mean that you've got 20 ICU beds and you're using 19 of them. But if there's only 3 of them that are COVID-19 patients, isn't that a little bit duplicitous to sort of tie those headlines together so that it sounds like COVID-19 patients are exhausting our healthcare facility capabilities?
Is that what you think is going on? Because I know Florida and Texas is getting a lot of crap because they're the ones who are like, hey, come, we're living free, we're open, everything's fine down here. And it is kind of not surprising that when everybody in Texas and Florida were wide open and living their lives and nothing was happening, because according to Fauci and other experts, the whole world was going to end for opening up. And now all of a sudden everybody wants to talk about Florida and Texas nonstop. What is going on in just in your opinion? Because I know that you keep up with current events and statistics and all that stuff. Is there a crisis going on in those states, or is it just more of the media manipulation of numbers and kind of fear mongering like typical media?
I can't speak to the specific hospitals in Texas and Florida, and I think it'd be irresponsible on my part if I did. But when you ask that generic question, Ricky, what's going on? I can tell you that I do speak, as I mentioned, with numerous hospital administrators, but also lots of nurses and doctors virtually every day. And I would say that, for instance, would be last week, I was seeing a nurse, and the hospital that she works at, they had, I think their unit was virtually at capacity, their ICU was full. And I just looked at her and I said, is it all COVID? And she quizzically, no, she said, almost none of them. She said, most of it's respiratory syncytial virus, RSV stuff. And she said, then there's some other people with asthma and things like that. So I think that people have become devilishly cute about being able to use data to support their perspective. And I think that they'll tell half the story, or they'll just complete half the sentence. And so I can't say that Florida and Texas aren't at a given situation. I haven't talked to anybody there, but I can say that certainly in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul area, that there's lots of hospitals that might have very impressive statistics about how full their ICU is. But if you actually look at the percentage of Minnesota ICU beds being occupied by a COVID-19 patient, and we should also say a COVID-19 patient that's in that bed for COVID-19. It should not be a heart valve patient that just had a heart valve replaced who incidentally happened to test positive on a PCR test the day after their surgery, but has no symptoms of COVID. We should be intellectually more honest, but I honestly think that the amount of times you see intellectual honesty on the parts of this whole discussion is shrinking.
Have you guys minimized your cycles for PCR in Minnesota? Or because I know that was a huge issue, something that I was harping on last year, was just how they were using way too many cycles when testing people and getting all these false positives. Is that something that's been a concern in regards to basically just making sure that they're not misusing the tests to inflate the numbers?
Huge concern. It's a huge concern, Ricky. In January, the World Health Organization, I believe in concert with the CDC, disseminated information that we should not be cycling, we should not be having threshold cycles of 40 to 45. We should reduce it to a more typical. And then the CDC came out, I think in May, and said that for fully vaccinated folks, they were not going to be using cycle thresholds of greater than 28, I believe, or 26, somewhere in that high 20s range. So we're definitely seeing some manipulation of that. But in terms of me as an in the trenches physician, when I get test results from hospitals and facilities that have the ability to run the testing, I'm not being told how many cycles they're running it at. And so I don't know what the threshold is. And that's concerning on multiple levels. So the misgivings that many of us have about what we're doing still persist.
And are they still considering anybody who dies within what is it, 20 something days of a positive test a COVID death? Because I know that was circulating for a while, just that conversation about that being an issue.
I believe that was a policy that was in place for certain nursing homes and potentially long-term care facilities. I don't know that that was ever really, if you will, in the trenches in the community. I don't think I was living under any kind of a situation where if someone had been tested positive for COVID-19 within the prior 21 days, if I saw a patient that perhaps died of a drowning accident or electrocution or something, that we were putting down COVID-19. I don't think that happened.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, it is an issue that so many people who are going to the hospital for other reasons, obviously it's just a part of the process now. You get tested for COVID. If you have a positive test, all of a sudden it inflates the case numbers, even though you have no symptoms. I've been making the joke, and I think I heard it somewhere else, that like if I went to my doctor and I said, hey, I have strep throat, and he asked me what's my symptoms, I'm like, I don't have any. And then he's like, well, yeah, but can I get tested? I'm pretty sure I have strep throat. And then if I argue with my doctor about, me having strep throat with no symptoms, he would look at me like I'm crazy. And now we're considering people sick who don't have any symptoms. And we're kind of ignoring the fact that there could be false positives or all these other reasons for inflations of numbers and all this stuff. So I know you're limited on time, and I don't want to take up too much of your time because it sounds like you have a lot of emails and people to get back to. But is there any last
question, Ricky?
What's
to
that?
your question?
Yeah, go ahead.
About is this kind of thing happening? Let me just draw out a scenario for you, and this happens a lot. So a patient might come in with a persisting problem with their gallbladder, and they're spitting out a stone periodically, and it's gotten to be too much, and their liver enzymes are elevating. So we get the workup done, and into the hospital they go for a gallbladder remove. We call it a cholecystectomy. They get checked in, and as a matter of course, many facilities will have a testing protocol for COVID-19. The surgery goes fine, the test comes back the next day positive for COVID-19. If you put COVID-19 as one of the discharge diagnoses, that may bode well for you or your organization down the road, depending upon what programs are in place to provide grants and federal support. And you can always make the case that once you found out that the patient had a positive COVID test, regardless of the fact that they had no symptoms, doctors and nurses know how to articulate our concerns with pretty impressive language. And we can say, well, once I had my post-operative cholecystectomy patient identified with COVID-19, regardless of the fact that there were no symptoms, I needed to broaden the view that I brought to my patient's care. And on a daily basis, I had to assess the oxygen level, the temperature, the blood pressure. Were there any micro blood clots going on? Never mind that the patient would not have any symptoms, nor would I have ever had that awareness had it not been for a positive PCR test, which may be a false positive, or a positive PCR test that would never have been done other than the fact that we have a protocol in place. Never mind any of that. I am now in a situation with a, quote, asymptomatic PCR positive COVID-19 patient, and that necessitates that I do all these other things, and therefore my pay, my time invested, the hospitalization, might all be due something additional beyond what they normally would get if there had been no positive PCR test for that cholecystectomy patient. This is the scenario that unfolds every day around the country. I kid you not. We know how to do that.
Well, when you came on my show the first time, I remember you talking about how death certificates are really important, and and it was actually the first time I really thought about it in regards to like state funding and state statistics and all that stuff. And throughout the years of writing them, you know, that was something that you took very seriously, and making sure you described what was the primary cause of death. And now it's like that's all gone out the window. Where it's just it's there's so many people that I know personally who had loved ones who passed away and then had issues with the death certificate saying it was COVID. And they're like, they might have had it, but that what, like, they're already in the hospital, or they're already, you know, so it just, you know, it does seem like there's so much information showing that, like, and to quote Mark Twain, you know, it's easier to trick somebody than convince them they've been tricked. There's so much information to show that we've been tricked that to me, it's like you said before, it's almost frustrating, because it's like I almost don't understand what you're not seeing. It's like, how are you still falling for this illusion? I mean, my only explanation in many cases is how tribalistic humans can be, and how, you know, it's like, well, my political team said this, so this is what I'm defending till the end of time. You know, it's no different than, like, you know, two people arguing about sports, right? I mean, you have to defend your team. Your team's, you know, Tom Brady's the best quarterback of all time. How do you argue that? You know, and it's like any other statistic or information that would say otherwise, I'm going to immediately resist because I'm defending my team. And it's really exposed how tribalistic our thinking is. I mean, we like to think that we look at all the information and come up with these logical conclusions, but a lot of people are just coming up to looking for the information to defend their conclusion, and they're not looking at the information because the information is out there. I mean, I must say, it's hard to find, and people like yourself and Dr. Peter McCullough and Dr. Robert Malone and all the doctors that have been outspoken, Dr. James Lyons Wheeler, all these great people who have had the courage to be outspoken. I mean, these aren't the voices you're finding when I go on YouTube or Google and I search for COVID information. These aren't the voices that I'm finding. And that's why we seem crazy when the person who puts on the TV says, hey, all the experts are saying otherwise. Like, what, they're not saying what you're saying. So you know, you're wrong. Look all the science, look all the statistics. And so it does seem like we're constantly battling against that. That's why I think the censorship big tech issue is such a big issue, because I think a lot of people, if they did get a chance to hear Dr. Scott Jensen, hopefully future governor of Minnesota, if they got to hear his arguments and what he has to say, most people would be like, wow, that makes way more sense than what the TV is telling me. So it's frustrating. Sorry, I probably should have ended that long rant with a question, but instead I'm going to give you the opportunity to let people know what you're up to, what anything to look for, any way they can help or support you. Let the listeners know.
Well, thank you again, Ricky, for having me on. I would say this: we are in a crisis like few could ever have envisioned. This feels like a Twilight Zone episode we're living through. This feels like Hunger Games. This feels like we're living in a George Orwell 1984 kind of time. I hope that regardless of our specific position on some of these issues, whether you're talking school lockdowns, whether you're talking about nursing home lock-ins, whether you're talking about masks, or whether you're talking about vaccines, whether you're talking about de facto mandates, I would hope that we could all just try to take a chill pill and just say, okay, I'm going to keep trying to listen to the other side. I'm going to start by asking them to help me understand where they're coming from, rather than starting with, I'm going to tell you why you're wrong. I think that's where we absolutely need to be. And I think that's the answer to getting back on some healthier place, in a healthier path. And that's why I'm running to be governor of Minnesota. I think that we need to heal Minnesota. Our website gives all of our positions. I mean, it doesn't matter what your issue is. we've done everything we can to make sure we're as transparent as possible. All people have to do is just go to drscottjensen.com, DrScottJensen.com. This has got to be about a movement. This has got to be a groundswell of people like you, Ricky, and all the thousands and thousands of viewers who follow you, and about me, and about all the others. We have got to make this a groundswell. And the groundswell has to be about not a person. It has to be about a set of values. It has to be about what is the highest value. Is it life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Or is it a restricted kind of safety defined by someone in government who's never been elected? What do you want? Do you want a restricted, heavy-handed, quote, safetyism? Or do you want dangerous freedom? For me, it's not even a choice. It's sort of like Aslan in the Chronicles of Narnia. Is he safe? No, he's not safe, but he's good. And that's the thing about freedom. Is freedom safe? Is freedom something you get by being safe? No, but it's the highest good.
Yeah, that's so important. There's a risk in driving. There's a risk in bungee jumping. There's a risk in skydiving. There's a risk in snowboarding. There's a risk in everything, but we don't risk any, or we don't take the opportunity for any people to enjoy those things because they're unsafe. I mean, there's risks in being alive and free, and we're willing to take those risks to enjoy our lives to the fullest. The problem is, we all have the right to pursue happiness, but some people are saying that, like, hey, the way you want to pursue it, I'm not happy with, so let me restrict it. And that's not fair. I would never push my beliefs on others, and that's all I'm asking in return. Don't push your beliefs on me. You live and let live. I mean, it kind of sounds like a hippie way of saying it, but it's like, it really is. If you simplify to that, it's like live and just let live. But you have the right to enjoy yourself. Life is too short. I mean, we don't get to hit the reset button to this whole idea of like, oh, just lock down a little longer or just wear a mask a little longer. It's like, some people don't have a little longer. You're taking every day for granted. You're telling us to sacrifice hours, days, months, years of our lives for something that potentially, is no more risky than taking a drive, so without a doubt, I will help you in any way I can. I hope that you win. I hope that you keep fighting, and I hope you find a way to respond to all those emails, because I think that's your biggest problem.
Thank you, Ricky, and have a great day.
You too. Thank you, Dr. Jensen. Appreciate your time.
Bye.
Take care.